With every breath I take all of my days, I will glorify your name.
Parents, welcome to another episode of The Journey, a podcast intended to educate, equip, and entertain you as we talk about important issues facing our families. PCA is a Christ-centered, biblically based, and family-focused community of committed believers doing life together. We hope the information you hear on this podcast informs and inspires you to be a better parent. Welcome to The Journey.
Hey parents, welcome back to The Journey. This is Dan Panetti. And for the summer, we've done some things in the past where I like reading a book, getting some other parents to read a book with me, and then kind of digesting it and giving it to our parents. And so I've got some parents here, and we read this particular book by George Barna called Raising Spiritual Champions, Nurturing Your Child's Heart, Mind, and Soul. And the great thing is I got some North Campus parents, and I got Holly. Holly Hamilton and I get to work together as Director of Parent Engagement and Ministry. And so our team, this is what we do. So Sandy and Joel, why don't you guys introduce yourself to the parents so that they know who they're listening to as well?
Sure, you bet. Thanks, Dan. Joel Gordon. I've got 4 kids at PCA. Had the oldest heading into 7th grade, the youngest heading into kindergarten. We've been at PCA for 4 years, and happy to be on the podcast.
Fantastic, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sandy Leidig. I have 2 kids at PCA North, amazing school. Actually, just graduated my first child, Blake. Was a senior this year.
How was that?
College. It was so good and hard.
Little tears?
Lots of tears. Let me
tears.
tell you, this school does an amazing job at their graduation.
Yeah.
An hour long of just opportunities to cry and celebrate. So it was beautiful.
That's awesome.
Beautiful, beautiful day. And then my son Rocco is going to be a sophomore here at PCA North.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And Holly, just in case parents don't know who you are, sorry.
That's okay.
Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I have 3 children at PCA Plano. My oldest is in 2nd grade, and we started here when he was in kindergarten, kind of moved around in different roles in the school, and now I'm working with Dan.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
being here.
And for those who don't know me, my kids are all old. My last one will actually be a senior, the baby, Campbell, but I've had 3 that have graduated from PCA, 2 that have already graduated from college, and then the daughter's still in college. So anyway, tons of fun. Interesting read by George Barna. For those who don't know Barna, right, his main background is in research. And so he loves to do studies. And so he put together this concept, right, of where are our kids and how are we doing in training up our kids to be, right, great Christians. And so he breaks it down into kind of 3 sections, and what we're going to do is we're going to break our conversation into 3 sections, into 3 kind of conversations, 3 different podcasts, 3 different episodes. Section 1, he talks about the importance of children. For me, that's kind of the why and the what. Right? Why did he write the book? What did he find out? Section 2 is going to be the 4 principles of a disciple, and it's going to be kind of the how. That's kind of the meat and potatoes of if you want to disciple your kids, like what are we talking about? What does that look like? And then Section 3 is going to be families and churches in partnership, and that's really the who. Right? It's going to be, as he talks about, the family is the parents are the primary disciplers, but the church is also an important component of that. And then, and I'll say this now, he gives 1 sentence to Christian schools, and we're going to give a lot more credence to Christian schools because I think from a discipleship standpoint, the Christian school can do a lot to come alongside the church and the parents in discipling your kids. So just from the very beginning, let me just hear the preface, and as he started to kind of dive in, even before we get to chapter 1, what did you guys think your initial reaction to the book?
Yeah, I think what I took away is just the intentionality behind the fact that we are making disciples.
Yep.
I think we do this naturally as Christian parents day to day where you're pointing them back to the Lord, you're calling sin, but he really made me think of it through the lens of I am making my children disciples of Jesus.
Yeah.
I think that intentionality was really clear for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, raising kids is one of the coolest ways we get to, in a sense, participate in creation.
Yep.
I mean, really, our kids' worldview is going to be whatever their parents' worldview is, and I think, the author Barna did a good job in kind of highlighting some of the critical importance of worldview and the critical role parents play in kind of co-creating with God these souls that are your kids.
I love
Yeah,
that.
kind of the C.S. Lewis concept, right? You've never met a mere mortal, right? Everybody that you meet, right, is an eternal being. And I think sometimes we forget that with our own kids, that they'll spend an eternity somewhere. And the idea, I think, for most Christian parents is we assume that they're spending an eternity with heaven because they have a relationship with Jesus. But really, it's the concept of what does that relationship look like, right? And so he gets into that a little bit more, which is kind of good. Holly, what do you think?
I thought it was a great way to set the stage for shifting my mindset from just my tendency to just parent and then learning discipling is different. Everybody who is a parent parents their children in one way or another. Not everybody who is a parent disciples their children.
Yeah.
Learning, like you said, that intentionality of what that looks
like. The concept from a parenting perspective, if you look at just parenting, right, you provide food and a place to live and, things like that, the physical needs, right? This is talking about the spiritual needs. And not everybody does that, and I think that's an important reminder. I will say, in the preface, this isn't to necessarily be negative. I kind of, before we even dive in, it was kind of interesting. He says, for someone to fulfill their potential and God-given calling, it's important for them to receive a strong start in life, which I kind of looked at and I went, I get what you're saying, right, because he's going to make a very, very strong case that discipling your kid from the youngest age possible is really, really important, which I totally agree with. But I've met so many people that have come to Christ later in life who would be further along in their spiritual life because as they came to Christ, they started taking it seriously. And I know a number of people who have grown up in Christian families and Christian homes that really probably weren't trained and discipled, and they just kind of were around the atmosphere. And I think they feel like they're further along. But one of the things that he talks about is just how a lot of these kids really haven't grown and matured in their faith. And so it's kind of an interesting thing to kind of look at. It's kind of like, I think the level of the seriousness that you put into it, obviously the longer you do it is better. But you've got people I know that have come to Christ, in their 20s and 30s, and they're rocking it. Yeah. They're killing it, right? Yeah. I mean, they dive into the Bible and they're tearing that thing apart and they're memorizing it, and they're doing that, and they're right. And I've got people who, they've been a Christian, right, and raised in a Christian home for 30 years, they don't know anything. Yeah. And so I think that the concept is, right, even though I know he wants to begin this, you need to start this with your kids from a young age. I think, yes, you do, but whatever age your kids own their own faith and begin to take it seriously, that's when they're going to really start to have kind of the growth and development.
Absolutely. I think you're right on that because as I read that, I thought, yes, and?
Yeah.
I think it was a little bit more narrow. Not that it's a lost cause if they get to 13 and, you haven't done all the things or they're not where you think they need to be.
Right.
I mean, I came to Christ much later in my life. I was 27. I'd made some big decisions in life already at that point.
Yeah.
And yet the Lord has come alongside me and led every step of my way,
Yep.
But I think the intentionality of making sure that you are thinking that even though kids are young, they are able to grasp concepts. You can talk to them like people.
Absolutely.
They're not just little people, right? And young people. And so I think that was the big takeaway for me. It was a little narrow, but I do think it's not a lost cause. Wherever your kid is, I think the goal, and I think our message today is engage now. Be intentional now.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Don't wait.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so Section 1, the importance of children. Chapter 1 is making the most of your life. Most young adults, 54%. Now, we may throw out a few statistics here because it's Barna. This is one that kind of hit me. Most young adults, 54%, admit that they feel anxious, depressed, or unsafe. He does not go into the whole effects of this generation dealing with cell phones. Not what he was talking about. I wish that he did, or I wish that he kind of addressed that because that would be super helpful. But just, I think what he's trying to lay out the ground is there's a difference between, and you mentioned this, right? Parenting and discipling your kids. There's a difference between being a Christian and kind of a person who is around, Christian environment and really a disciple of Christ. And if you're a disciple of Christ, I think he's, examining that concept and saying, hey, you're addressing these particular things. And so would 54% of really disciples in Christ really be struggling with these particular areas, or should that number be a red flag to us that a lot of our kids probably haven't taken their spiritual walk very seriously? And I don't know, just because anxiety, depression, or unsafe. I mean, I'm like, you're not removed from the world, right? I mean, the prayer for Jesus is, hey, don't take them out of the world, right? Prepare them for the world. So I still think there's going to be some difficulties in there. But anyway, it's kind of a, where he's going with this is trying to lay the groundwork for why spiritual formation is important. What did you guys think about how we started off?
Well, I think oftentimes in the church we pay lip service to dying to self, and I think at the core we don't really live that way.
Yeah.
We still, even in front of our kids, talk about our stresses, anxieties, just things we're depressed about, and that's, I think, a lot of the way our culture is. It causes us and our kids to kind of turn in on themselves, be self-reflective, self-aware, all of these kind of self-focused attitudes.
Yeah.
And I certainly think cell phones are a tool of that allow you to just turn, rather than taking you out into the world, you turn back in on yourself and cave in on yourself.
Yeah.
And so I do think the loss of the seriousness of the importance to die to self is really the root of the cell phone problem, the root of really any of the problems that our kids struggle with. And I think that concept is the antidote to a lot of the suffering that exists with a lot of kids and adults today.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would say also that I think we live in this world, right? And I'll tell you, last night Blake and I were trying to watch TV, and we were like, what do we watch? Like, media, and we'll get into this, is just saturated with non-biblical worldview.
Yeah.
I mean, we watch The Office, right? Funny show. Yep. But the main character is just such an idiot and like so inappropriate. and like he's not, I would not want my son to look at him and be like, what a man. You know what I mean? And so.
Honestly, it's a great point, because the whole idea of like heroes, that's gone.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
It's just, our kids don't have heroes that they see anymore, because what we find humorous, right, is really sarcasm and stupidity. Right? I mean, that's the whole thing, because really you can't, in today's culture, you can't elevate one person above anybody else and say, hey, this is the right way to live and this is the right way to do things, and we model after them. So what do is we go to the lowest common denominator, and we all just laugh at kind of the collective stupidity of humanity. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't make us any better.
It doesn't. It's funny. I'm not going to lie. Like, we'll get a laugh, but I sit back as a parent, right, through that biblical view and say, this has no value to my time, to my children's time. And so I do think we're swimming in this culture. And I think even as Christian parents, even in Christian schools and in amazing schools like the ones that we're part of, because not all Christian schools are equal, I think it's just easy for us to make concessions, meaning my kid's going off to college, right? And they're like, oh, college, it'll still be college. And I'm like, but does it have to be? I want to set her up for like appropriate expectations, but I'm setting her apart too. Yeah. And a lot of times I think we just, maybe through the introspection, we're like, well, not like whatever, but we really do permission things, I think, a little easier, because we're swimming in this world 24/7. So,
True. He goes into a little bit, the Great Commission is a basic call to action as disciples, mentions Bonhoeffer's, right? So here's the deal. I'll throw a couple other books out there that I think are important as you want to go through. If you want to read The Cost of Discipleship by Bonhoeffer, and you really want to understand the premise of which he's laying out, like what does it really mean to be a disciple? That's a great book, right, to pick up, especially the first half of it. I think he gets a little long-winded at the end. But, the difference between cheap grace and just kind of like the idea of, walking down an aisle and giving your life to the Lord as opposed to picking up your cross, dying to yourself daily. There's a different mindset between those two concepts. And I see it when I go to church and I hear people like, well, I didn't really like the sermon, right? And they have this consumer-esque mentality, right? I go to church for what I get from it, as opposed to, this is the place where I'm being trained to go make a difference in the world, right? And so it doesn't really matter if I like the sermon or didn't like the sermon. Like, I'm going to be trained, right? You don't go to Navy SEALs and say, hey, did you like the training today? Was it fun? Was it enjoyable? You got to roll around on the beach a little bit and be in the ocean. You're like, what are you talking about? Like, we're training to go out, right, and do battle, right? And I think he's trying to get us in that mindset a little bit. Like, there's a war out there, right? He's going to talk about being spiritual warriors. Are we doing a great job training and preparing our kids for the battle that's going to be out there in front of them? And I think for the most part, the answer is No. From a Christian perspective across the board, I think we have a very comfortable, right? That's the goal of Christianity, right? Is to be, healthy, wealthy, and comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? And he's like, okay, if that's what you want, right, then the world's going to take you and make it easy for you, right? But I think there's a different mindset. And I think, and you were just talking about putting a kid on a college campus.
Right.
Have you seen college campuses lately?
Right.
Right? So preparing kids to be able to not survive but thrive in the environment that's going on out there, you're going to have to do a lot of training from that perspective.
And Dan, to that point, can I add
Yes.
something really quickly? I think that goes back to the difference between discipling and Christianity.
Totally.
Because, like Christianity, especially Christian parenting, I think it's very easy to focus on the actions and correcting behavior or directing in a certain way. And I think the discipleship lays the foundation for the why.
Yes.
Why that's not okay to do. And I think we don't always, in the busyness of life or the stress of parenting, we don't take the time to explain to children who are capable of understanding the why, the scriptural reason and biblical reason for why what you just did was wrong. And I think that is layers. And I think that's to his point of starting off with a strong foundation, if you can, when you can, to lay the layers of discipleship for your children in age-appropriate ways, because they are capable of understanding the why. And I think that also, with their own understanding of why, alleviates a lot of the anxiety, the stress, the things that he mentions of depression, because it takes away the legalism and it turns it to your heart. And what is your heart? Is your heart in a place of a relationship with God where that matters because you understand?
And the why simplifies things as well. I think as parents sometimes, when we parent tactically, do this, don't do that, it's complicated. And I like the concept of, God isn't too complex to understand. He's too simple to understand. Like, he's too pure. He's too fine. And because goodness is of the nature of God, then goodness is simple as well. And so I think when we can help our kids understand the why, which is kind of the underlying pattern of the Bible, the underlying message in the Bible, then it can simplify their faith for them rather than having a long list of things they need to keep in their mind. They get to the heart of it, they get to the goodness of it, and it makes the execution of a biblical worldview and the execution of a life that is honoring to God significantly easier.
Yeah, he's going to get into some parenting tactics. He's going to tell you that prioritizing the spiritual development of your kids is important. For me, this is my Genesis 26:25, building altars, pitching tents, digging wells. Right, the building altars is the more important part than pitching tents. Right, we have to have a tent. We need to live in a tent. Right, but nobody ever put that much time, energy, and effort into pitching their tent as they did to building something. And so he's just going to say, right, I mean, look at your life and look at what you're prioritizing, because your kids are picking up what you're doing more so than even what you're saying. He's going to talk about, establishing some inflexible, Bible-based priorities and boundaries. Do we have those conversations with our kids, and do we, lay down some parameters for them? He's going to talk about the influence, of their friends. And this is where, it's funny because he calls them friends in one, and then later he calls them their peers, right? And I'd much rather call them their peers as opposed to their friends. But he says the single most important attribute from a parenting perspective in the discipling of your kids is your consistency. What do you guys think about that?
Boy, that's a key to everything, right? It's consistency. I do. I think that it needs to be consistent, because without that, they know it. Kids are smart, and they know it early in life. I mean, I think they test us very early when they're little bitty to really see if what you're saying is true.
Yep.
And so I think that's absolutely crucial, is that consistency of message through their life, not just in phases of their life, really, like the consistency, like from the time they're born until hopefully forever, right? Even when they graduate and they're back, they see that how you're walking, which we don't do it perfect all the time, and it's a great opportunity to tell our kids, here's what's happening to me because I didn't, or what have you. But yeah, the consistency is key to everything.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think also you touched on this, acknowledging inconsistency.
Yeah.
We're not perfect, and we're going to have inconsistencies.
That's right.
And so the conversations where you kind of bring that back with them, where like, listen, this is what I said and this is what I did, and I'm sorry for that. I think that's important as well, because it's although consistency is important, it's something we're going to fall down on
Totally.
often.
Yeah. The only one who doesn't is Christ himself.
Yeah.
Right? The rest of us all have opportunities to apologize to our families for, I know I say this, but I do this, and let me tell you why. He did say this: 3 out of 4, again, another statistic. 3 out of 4 born-again parents have priorities that they are pursuing that they consider more important than raising their kids to be spiritual champions. And he talked about this, right, is what would be more important. And basically the concept is there's other things like school, sports, or relationships that parents prioritize over their relationship with the Lord. Let me just, from a parent, right, as we're parenting our kids, I think it's easy to fall into those concepts of my kids' involvement. How well are they doing at school? Like, that's the most important thing. How well are they doing in sports? That's the most important thing. I think it's easy to fall prey to that, as opposed to those are opportunities for them to participate in, but that's not the preeminence of who they are as a person. What do you guys think?
I mean, in a sense, parenting is the controlled falling apart of your kids' lives. I mean, if you interfere in things going wrong for your kids, they aren't going to learn anything. And so I think with a number of areas in their life, what you're there is to provide the structure of failure, so that failure doesn't harm their health and it doesn't harm their long-term their long-term growth. But you have to allow failure and you have to allow disappointment, and you cannot remove those things from their life. Otherwise, you are removing a critical ingredient to success for the rest of your life. And so I do think with parenting, you can get distracted on starting to focus on some things that you want your kids to be successful in this very, Facebooky way.
Yep.
But I think the reality is you need to allow enough room for your kids' lives to be a mess, controlled, so that they realize the connection between their actions, their heart, and the reality of their lives.
Yeah, that could be the next book from Joel, is
I was gonna
parenting,
say,
the controlled
beautifully.
falling apart of your kids' lives. Right?
Yeah, I think you
That'll
said that
sell.
beautifully.
It
Absolutely.
is. It's a way of putting it together.
Yeah.
I love it. Chapter 3 talks about disciple making. Yes, but why children? One of my favorite books is Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle, and he talks about how youth is the seed time of full growth. And so just, I think this is the one thing that I really took away from the book is, from a parenting perspective, how important it is to disciple our kids as young as possible, right? And Sandy, you said, right, when they're little, I mean, it's amazing how much they can learn. And so those little things that we do with our kids of, making sure that they're at church and putting them in, Bible drill, or, just having conversations at home about spiritual things, I think, we try to make it seem like it's, like, oh, I'm not doing it perfectly and I didn't have a, family devotion time. It's like, listen, here's the deal. Every day is devotion time, right? Every day you're promoting what you believe is important. And so you're training your kids, right? Whether it's a default training or whether you're intentional about it. And I think all he's saying is, just be a little bit more intentional, right? Be a little bit more intentional, from the youngest age. Because I'm telling you, if worldview is set by age 13, right, they're really learning things before we're really paying attention to the fact that they're learning.
Yeah, and I think change happens when the person is brought along the journey. I think this is a thing that, back to the parenting piece, right? Like, if you're just constantly in telling mode, your kid's not absorbing that and personalized. And I think you said it beautifully, like that. Even though we turn in, we want them to turn in and really kind of assess themselves according to him. Yeah. Right? Not the world, not their friends, not you, not anything like that. And so I think change is you have to bring them along the journey. So I think about Blake and Rocco when they were little, the conversations we had then versus the conversations we have now. They're way deep and richer today because their ability to comprehend is deeper and richer. I'm in 2 Samuel, and we're talking about David and saying, like, whether it's to Rocco or Blake, can you imagine if you're a king and you stayed home from a battle you were supposed to go to, and then you see this person and look at the choices that were made? What do you think David was going through? Like, really trying to make it personal, because they're going to go through their own, maybe not David specifically moments, but their own moments. So I think having that dialogue with as little as they can understand all the way through adulthood. And when we just continue to disciple them into past adulthood, when they're parents, because we're going ahead of them, right? We're parents now. They'll be parents hopefully later. I think you have to bring them along. You can't talk to them, at them. I definitely know folks who parent from the I said so, I told you so, versus let me help you understand why we do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important for kids to understand.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think all the things that you mentioned, Dan, the going to church, Bible memorization, these are all excellent things to focus on adding to your kid's life.
Right.
I think sometimes as parents we can lose track of the things that we don't want our kids to lose. And I know I can be guilty of this, where it's, their play, it's like, well, don't do that in the house, or don't mess this, or don't. And for me, I'm keenly aware of the reality. I don't want them to lose their childlike wonder about this world and their curiosity and their imagination and their playfulness. And I think sometimes, for me, I can focus on the things I'm supposed to add to their life and not focus on the things that I'm also supposed to help them keep. Because we want to send them into the world curious, playful, adventurous. I mean, that's God, that was what God's instruction to Adam was really to subdue the world, and that takes an adventurous spirit. And so I think that's an important parallel to the things we want to add, is the things we want to help them keep as they kind of transition from childhood to adulthood.
And I love that you said that, because I do think as parents, you ask the question, like when we get a little bit too worried about friends and social life and sports and accolades at school, right? I think you're leading. So as a leader, you have to check yourself and your motivations, right? Because we have such an incredible opportunity and honor to shepherd them. And they're watching you. So if you're like, I need you to win that game, right? Versus, I need you to give your best. Yeah. Because God calls us to give our best to your team, right?
I had a conversation. So we had academic awards, right? We're at a school, right? There, there's arts, there's athletics, there's academics, right? But there were academic awards, and they're calling all the different kids up to give them the different awards or whatever. And a parent was very upset because their son or daughter didn't receive a particular award, right? They just sat through the whole thing, didn't receive an award. It's like, why can't you give an academic award to everybody to make everybody feel like, they're valuable? And I was like, they should feel like they're valuable whether they get an award or not, because they are, right? So they don't make the, volleyball team, their freshman year. They're still valuable, right? There's just other people who are better at this particular thing at this particular time, right? I remember, Michael Jordan got cut when he was in high school, right? So he was not good enough to be, on the basketball team at that particular time. And I think if we teach our kids, right, like you've got to get something every time so that somebody's, realizing that you're valuable. It's like, no, you're valuable. And school doesn't test your value for everything anyway, right? It's, okay, do I know math? Well, then you get a math award. Well, great. That's awesome. We need some engineers out there, but here's the deal, right? Math is not my, my jam. So I'm going to, get an award in something else that maybe this particular school doesn't have as a particular subject, but that's fine because this isn't all of life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It's just, I think we have to be very careful of that concept from a parenting perspective as we're training our kids to realize that's part of the training and their worldview development is that I want them to see themselves through the eyes of how God has made them, not through the eyes of how school or the world, right, celebrates those particular things at this particular time.
That's right. They're easy to become idols if you're not careful, and then you're just modeling that for your children, that this is what matters. It's really not that. It's training up the child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, anything else for the first section? Because we've got 2 more sections to go in this particular book. We'll stop it here and we'll pick up section 2 and come back.
Thank you for investing the time to listen to this episode of The Journey. Please take a minute to share with friends and family who will also benefit from this valuable resource. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast app. It is truly our blessing and honor to walk with you on The Journey.